Hello, Red Nail Energy listeners. This is Mikhail, and I'm coming at you in studio today with Abigail. Abigail is a licensed therapist and the founder of Soul Therapy Idaho, a warm, grounded space where healing meets science. She blends clinical expertise with embodied wisdom, helping clients reconnect to their nervous systems, release trauma, and feel at home in their own bodies. Whether she's teaching polyvagal theory or guiding somatic practices, Abigail makes the deep work feel approachable. She's here to remind us that healing does not have to be perfect, it just has to be real. Welcome, Abigail.
Thank you. That was an incredible introduction.
Yes, of course. And I just have to share with listeners, because I always love the little behind the scenes of how some of these connections come to be. But your sweet husband shouted you out on LinkedIn, and I happened to see it being in Boise, and I feel like maybe somebody I was connected with liked it, and I saw it. And I just had such an intuitive, I need to connect with this girl. And so it was so sweet. One, just may that type of love find all of us. He just seems like your biggest fan, which was so sweet to see. And then to be able to have us here now connecting in person is just such a sweet synchronicity.
Yeah, it's funny. He was like, with this new business, you should have a LinkedIn. I was like, there's just too much. Social media is just too much sometimes. And he's like, well, all right, if you think so. And he posted it and I didn't know, and you reached out, and it was awesome.
Yeah, I know. It's so fun when those things come full circle. And it's a kind of a reminder for me. I get very go, 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 do. And I think it's often when I am in that space of nervous system regulation, which we'll talk about, but where I can actually receive. And often if you're in that one track mind, maybe you're on LinkedIn for a reason, you're going to miss the opportunities to connect. And for me, it's such a great reminder that we can apply to everything in life. Like when we're just so tunnel vision, we may not realize there's the most amazing opportunities to connect or learn or grow right outside of that tunnel that we're so stuck in. So
I love that, Mikhail.
yeah, it was a nice reminder. Well, let's chat a little bit about Soul Therapy Idaho and kind of how you got to the place now where you've opened your own practice.
Yeah, I've been working in the Valley here in community mental health for a few years. So I started as a case manager, kind of working with the refugee population, coming in and resettlement, and then became an intern with my grad program with the same agency, and then a licensed professional counselor, and then a head therapist. And then it was amazing. I love my work. I worked with adults from anxiety, depression, trauma, psychosis, resettlement, acculturation issues. And then I just realized I wanted more of that work-life balance. I have 2 kids. I wanted to be able to come home and still have energy for them. And I was kind of very much no, I'm not going to do private practice, not going to do it. And then as my kids have gotten older, and maybe I've gotten a little more brave, I was like, well, why not? Let's just go for it. So started this year, and I'm still loving it, working at my agency as well, and doing both at the same time because I love my clients. So it's been going well.
Yeah. Was there something for you either personally or in your own history that kind of called you to go into this type of helping profession?
Yeah, I guess with that, so we're taught in our society that don't trust your feelings. That's a very broad statement, but an example is a kid has a tummy ache, doesn't want to go to school, right? Parents have to work. We're like, no, it's fine. Just go to school. It'll go away. And that kid then learns oh, I'm not going to listen to my body. Right? That's a very basic example. I'm like that with my own children who's they have a tummy ache. I'm like, well, I gotta go, But I think that broadly shows hey, we taught from a really young age not to listen to ourselves. With myself, I guess how far back do we want to go? I was always a very sensitive kid from the adults around me have told me. And I think I learned pretty early on that, hey, being too sensitive, I'm doing air quotes now, I know you can't hear me, but being too sensitive, that is being too vulnerable. And then that disrupts connection with others. So I learned to be what I thought was resilient and strong, and I stopped listening to myself. And I was mandated by a court to go to counseling, and as a tween, and I was like, this man's not going to break me, and I'm not going to tell him how I feel. Which tween wants to, if you try to get them to do anything, they're going to go the opposite. And I think the therapist there tried to do the best he could with, trying to let me open up. But I was
Right.
like, no, I'm not
Yeah.
going to. And it wasn't until later, and I met a safe person that I began to be like, oh, I can trust myself and open up with them. But it took a really long time for me. And that's part of my journey. And I think with that, I became a helper and a listener for other people. Like we could psychoanalyze this and be like, is it because I didn't have that myself? Is it because I was desperately trying to do that for someone else and I wanted them to do it for me? Probably yes to all the things. But I became really good at it. And so I think through my journey, like I was very late into becoming a therapist. Like that wasn't what I initially wanted to do. I was like, oh no, I'm not going to do that. But I don't know, life has a roundabout way to bring me
Yeah.
back.
Absolutely, it does. I think that, I mean, that just like resonates so much with me. I feel like we are so often told to not trust our feelings. And then when you become kind of, as a lot of the listeners here, these high achieving women, we're also just taught to intellectualize our feelings. So even as you just said, like we could psychoanalyze this and whatever, I relate so much in this way of like the why behind things. And I think that especially as we get deeper into our conversation about some of the somatic practice and some of the ability that we can unlock feelings and recognize it doesn't really matter why. It doesn't matter why this exact feeling ended up in my traps that I always, bring my shoulders up when I'm sitting there, or it doesn't really matter why I have this like specific response within my body in certain situations. And as like fixers, we often are like, but just tell me why so I can understand it. And I've learned in my own healing that like sometimes you're just not going to understand it. It's not going to fully make sense in this way of like, when I was 4, this one thing happened. And so now that I know that it's going to go away, it's like, no, we have to get deeper into our bones and our bellies and our bodies to actually feel the feelings to the other side and not have it stuck so much in our head, which is something I'm really excited to get into with you because I just think that it's so common to be like, well, once I can figure out where this came from, it'll just magically be healed.
Yeah.
And that just isn't often, in those maybe traditional initial entry into talk therapy, as you said, the therapist did the best they could and also had you maybe been given some tools in that to not be like, talk about it here, just to instead like, let's feel into it, which often isn't safe at the beginning, but is just such a gift to give yourself or to be able to share space with somebody and provide for them.
Yeah, I think that that's something where it's like, I have even myself. It's like, okay, let's go in. Can afford 8 sessions with a therapist. Like, let's. These are things I want to work on, and I think that that can be incredibly powerful, right? Especially with financially and insurance. Like they're only going to cover 8 sessions. You got to do what you can do.
Right.
But I think sometimes there's another layer that's missed, which is kind of going into the body as well. And if you can incorporate both, great.
Amazing. Exactly. Yeah. What is your approach typically? I'm sure everyone is very different, but do you have kind of a flow or something that has worked well for you in previous years when it comes to kind of building that trust and then figuring out when someone may be ready to go a little bit deeper into their body or a somatic practice?
Yeah, I think everyone's so different, right? And I think as we go into this conversation, for a lot of us, we are, right, we've been trained to not look at our body. So even just to be able to like, okay, to have someone say, well, how does that feel? Like, where does that feel for you? It's blank. It's like, what do you mean by that? Like, it doesn't feel great.
Right.
And so it's just really starting really, really small in really approachable ways, because if we are taught, and a lot of times, and with trauma, we might get into this, but like our body's dangerous. It's a dangerous place to feel because feeling means pain and hurt. And so we go into that, like our bodies are amazing and they help us survive so much. And so there's going to be this disconnect from going into the body because of past experiences or whatnot. And we need to honor that and respect it and not just kind of like bulldoze through it and be like, this is wellness, this is embodiness. Like, no, like we have to take it really slow, person by person.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it is something where being in that experience and having been in sessions with multiple people, I'm sure it's a lot of intuition and kind of feeling where someone's at or noticing if there's this catch or a hesitation and pausing there and kind of going into it or knowing where to sort of draw the boundary? And in your practice and experience, are there ways that people either trying to heal, quote, on their own, or maybe in situations can be pushed too far and it can kind of have the opposite effect?
Mm-hmm. Very much so. And I think that this is where being very trauma informed is
Mm-hmm.
important, right? I think we've all maybe been in situations where someone says something that puts us on guard.
Yeah.
And then we're like, oh, they're not. And maybe it's a very subconscious level, like they're not a safe person to talk to about
Mm-hmm.
this, or they're not going to get this perspective. Um, and so, yeah, like I think people can be very much pushed too far. And it's just very much taking it by their cues. And I love how you said that, like reading people. And as a therapist, and I know our listeners aren't all therapists, but it's my job to read you really well, take in all the
Yeah.
cues and be grounded in myself and regulated enough to know, as well as like I also ask my clients like, hey, like how do you feel if we try this? And a lot of clients were like, yeah, and other clients like, not today.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't feel great today. I'm like, okay, right,
Yeah.
because choice and consent is so important.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and as I'm starting my own private practice, like right, people come to me more for this, right, because they know
Mhm.
like, hey, this is somatic therapy that I do, and so they're a little more familiar.
Mhm.
But yeah, my other agency work, sometimes I just take it really slow.
Yeah. And in its own way, like a little light bulb went off in my head with asking people for consent and having somebody know themselves and trust themselves enough to say no. I think
Mm-hmm.
that alone, you as the person experiencing that with them and being in the energy space of it may see they're saying yes, but there's all these cues within their body that are saying no, and helping
Mm-hmm.
people understand that no is a complete sentence. It does not mean anything about the way you feel about somebody or anything to say no. And I think that's something I've been working through personally is like, I could make a list of 500 things that I love, but for me to even think about some of the things that I dislike or that I'm not as, called to move toward or lean into, it's a little bit harder because I have been a people pleaser for so much of my life. And so I think pausing in moments, not even just in a therapeutic setting, but when somebody asks if you want to do something, I've really started to learn and like, where do I feel that question in my body? Is it just my first response to be like, yeah, sure, I'm game, let's go? And also, when I say yes to something, it means I'm saying no to something else. There's always that opposing thing. And so, yes to going out and maybe spending an evening having dinner with friends that I love and are great may mean no to recharging and self care. And that might be what I actually need in that moment. And so, I think it's really great to, in that setting, practice that and ask people how they're feeling about it. And again, learn to trust your feelings. Like your feelings about things are safe and okay versus like, well, this medical professional is saying to do it, so I might as well just do it.
Yeah, and that's important. I love that you say that. I kind of got chills a little bit. Like how powerful it is just saying no as a healing process for you. And especially in a therapeutic context where there's power dynamics there for the client to be able to say no, that they're not going to do something, and for the therapist to listen, like that is healing in itself,
Mhm.
right? Like that's giving choice and agency back, which so often is taken away
Yeah.
from people.
Yeah.
So very much consent is so huge. I love that you brought that up.
Yeah. Let's start with you at the beginning of a session. What are some things you've learned work well for you to regulate your nervous system and ground, especially when you're absorbing probably so much energy that is like trauma and at different frequencies that as a loving, empathetic person, it's so easy to absorb and like take on. So, what are some of your personal practices that help you ground like before or after sessions?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think for me, and maybe we should go into a little bit, and I want to answer this question, but go into what regulating the
Yeah,
nervous system is
perfect.
and what a nervous
Mhm.
system is. But to answer your question first, for me, like, my job is to have like I offer a safe container, right, for people to come in. And for me, regulating myself is being very hyper aware of what I'm feeling in the moment. How am I responding? How am I going into session? I have, yeah, processes for me where I'm like, I might use touch from my head and I just kind of touch my face and go down to my body where I'm just grounding myself into this space. Maybe I'll put my hand on my heart and just kind of notice what's there. Like, is there buzzing? Do I really have to pee? Do I have
Right.
to am I rushing into this next client? And I really take a moment to acknowledge it and respect it, but then also to settle, right? Because this room is sacred,
Right.
and that really helps me.
Mhm.
And after session, I have my own, processes sometimes, like before I leave the day. I'll go and wash my hands. I had a friend who's a therapist friend, and he said that he did that, and I loved that. So just that process of washing and leaving things at work. Sometimes I put on a song and I move and dance and just move energy through, and that's really helpful if I have time. So those
Mhm.
are some things.
I love that. I love the rinsing or washing your hands because I will try to visualize when I'm in situations that I've absorbed energy that maybe I don't want to take with me, actually absorbing or actually visualizing myself as like a porous sponge and like
Mm-hmm.
squeeze and wring some of the energy out. But I feel like adding in the practice of very intentionally washing your hands and like picturing whatever it is
Mm-hmm.
that you don't want to bring with you, actually
Yeah.
rinsing can be so helpful because it can be overwhelming. Even if you're listening and you're just sharing space and being there for somebody that's going through something really difficult, it's such an honor. And it's
Mm-hmm.
also important to note that it can be a lot. Like, it's okay to say, this is a lot. Even if I'm not the one experiencing it, this is a lot for me to be going through right now. I think often it's like, well, they have it so much worse, or like, but it's not happening to me. But some of those practices allow us then to share space and be there for the people we love or that we're serving
Mm-hmm.
as a client and showing up for in that way. So, all of those, I'm sure, give you even more of an opportunity to be so present and available to your clients
Mm-hmm.
versus I am a huge energy absorber. And there are times like I can feel from across the room somebody is really experiencing something, and my own body will buzz and I'll kind of feel like that shaky
Mm-hmm.
feeling. And so it's something that I'm really excited to like dive into practice that our listeners can use and I can also use because it is truly like a flip of a switch when you're in your own body and you feel that your nervous system is regulated and grounded, and it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And people have different levels of sensitivity to that, but I will call out I am very sensitive to
Mm-hmm.
it. So I always love hearing new perspective and learning new practice.
Yeah, I think that's important, right? And especially with like my work, like my job is I never want my clients to be worried
Mm-hmm.
that what they're going to say is going to affect me at all. And I'm like, this is why I'm here. Like, yeah, I'm human, but this is the space, and you don't have to worry about that,
Right.
right? Like, this is your sacred space. So it's very important as a therapist that you are grounded, that you are regulated, so your clients can have that co-regulation, which I
Mm-hmm.
think we'll get into
Yeah.
a little bit.
Yeah, let's dive in. So, what is our nervous system in general, and like how are the ways that it can either be regulated or dysregulated?
Yeah, so our autonomic nervous system is, it's basically we go through life and we're looking for the cues of safety and cues of threat. And our autonomic nervous system is what's happening almost in this neurobiological level, right? Where we're going through life. Let's say an event happens. There's like two responses really. It's a response of protection or connection, right? So is something that happens, is it going to draw us towards connecting, or are we going to go more into protection? So there's an event, and then there's these two responses, and there's something happening on this biological level with our nervous system that leads us down these pathways, right? So for example, we could have the same event that happens, but people respond differently
Mm-hmm.
to it. Why is that, right? It's the same event, and really it comes down to our nervous system and what happens in that way. So I kind of, I've Stephen Porges, who is kind of the creator of this polyvagal theory, which I'm going to get into. He kind of describes the nervous system as like this upside down triangle, where at the base, you have your brainstem, and it's percolating all the information from our circuits throughout our body and our organs up to our brain and our higher cortical functioning. And this goes a little sciencey, but I kind of nerd out about
I
it.
love it.
And right when we're safe, we're able, the brainstem sends more information up to those higher brain structures, and those are online. Right? We could think of, we're able to think or process. When there's a cue of danger, the brainstem doesn't, those parts up top, right? They kind of go offline, and our more primal brain takes over, right? So that's kind of what's happening in our bodies as we go throughout life. And our bodies are continually looking all the time for cues of threat, safety. And I think a lot of times when people say threat or danger, they think, oh, like something huge or violence. And I'm like, no, it could be something like we have a meeting at work and, we're feeling a little activated or stressed by it. And our body's like, oh, there's maybe a little stress here. There's a little bit of threat here. How are we going to respond? Right? So that's kind of the very basic of, it's not basic, but a very quick overview of what's happening in our nervous system. And I want to say that this happens without like our conscious knowing, I guess, right? Like it's happening so quickly without our awareness. We can begin to become more attuned to it. But, right, it's just, this is how we're wired, right? Designed, evolved, whatever you want to say in there, like how we're created to be. So, yeah, that's a very broad
no, that's very helpful. I love that it's as like simplified as protection or connection. And I got like an emotional wave when you said that, because how many situations, every single one we experience, can we look at and break it down to those two things? And especially in interpersonal or maybe intimate relationships, I think it's really easy to get so like in the weeds of this one specific thing or a glance or a look or this or that. But if from a loving place we can say, this really feels like you're seeking protection right now, like maybe what's going on here, it's such a different space that we could present or receive from somebody versus like, well, why did you just look at me like that? And why are you slamming? Why are you doing these things? I think if we learn to start also observing people's responses or reactions to things as connective or protective, it's like another way of just a lens to look at some of our interactions.
And the nervous system, right, is, our common denominator with all humanity. We all have one, and we're all thinking, feeling, acting from our own nervous systems and how it's made. So yeah, I love that lens. It kind of helps us understand ourselves and why we feel we do the things we do, but it begins to help us understand other people as well.
And then from kind of the scientific perspective, what happens in our body when our autonomic nervous system is activated like too much, or it's kind of in that overactive state?
Yeah, so I think with this question, I might go into a little bit of polyvagal theory here.
Please.
So, there's kind of 3 states in polyvagal theory. And the first one, right, like, so let's say our protective systems are come online, right? There's our sympathetic nervous system, and that's our mobilizing energy. That's our fight, flight response, right? Our heart rate goes up, our breathing gets faster. Our body's flooded with energy. So I kind of like to think of it, we could say the whole bear analogy, right? Like we see a bear in the woods, like, are we going to fight or run away? And I will also say maybe this is not a great analogy because please don't fight a bear. And maybe depending on runaway, like maybe Google it, which bear and trail safety, like we'll just putting that plug in there. But you guys get what I mean.
Yes.
Right? Like, so our bodies, see the threat, and this is a good thing, right? It's if we didn't have like the sympathetic response, this activating, mobilizing energy, it would not be good in this situation. And then once we get away, our bodies, are wired to go back to kind of homeostasis and calm. What you kind of mentioned is like, what if we can't get to that calm after, right? And I kind of call that, autonomic rigidity, right? We're not able to flow and be fluid and go throughout these states as we're meant to for a variety of reasons. So risks for that, right, are, we could say like social isolation, loneliness, emotional dysregulation, disruption of sleep, even some like illnesses, right? Because our nervous system, and I don't know if I mentioned this, but it, our vagus nerve goes all the way from our brainstem through our lungs, our diaphragm, our gut, like it goes throughout all of our bodies. And a lot of the research shows that, it also affects our immune response. So when we are dysregulated, and dysregulated means we're not able to come back to this homeostasis, right? it wreaks havoc on our bodies. So that's on one hand, right? Our sympathetic is our mobilizing energy. But what if we can't get away from this bear? What if the bear is at home and comes and we see the bear every night, right? Then our body goes into a survival state of freeze, but almost like collapse, right? And we call this like our dorsal vagal, and that's part of our parasympathetic nervous system. And that's where our body goes into conserve energy, to hide, to survive. So we remove ourselves from our body, we dissociate. I very much kind of like this word of like collapse into ourselves, and that this is a protective strategy, right? And it's important to have. We conserve energy, we rest, we restore. But if we stay in this dorsal vagal activation, stay in this collapse, the research shows that, hey, like a lot of these people have GI issues as well, because that's where our vagus nerve goes and our dorsal vagal to our gut. And the research here is just mind-blowing with that. And with that is like depression, right? We don't have energy to go up. And I think about this sometimes, and we could even see this like, hey, you're having a really hard conversation with your partner and you shut down, or they shut down, right? There's an element where they dissociate enough from this conversation. It could be just like that as well.
And is that also when you'll hear the term flooded? So like oftentimes when people will really shut down or kind of like withdraw in situations, they'll say that like they're experiencing flooding or like a flooded probably nervous system, but it's that kind of overwhelm where you can't engage or kind of converse in that.
Overwhelms like your ability to cope, sort of thing. It could be, right? Like I think of this as like, if we simplify it as like the protection connection, something that's happening in this moment, your nervous system has been, okay, I need to protect myself. And this is the way I'm going to do it, right? Like it's either dorsal collapse or sympathetic activation. And that's something that like, hey, like some people find themselves going to more than the other, for example. And I learned polyvagal from Deb Dana, and she called herself a dorsal dweller. And I love that because I was like, oh, like that's my normal response when I experience stress. Right? Like my dorsal, like that pathway of protection goes straight to that dorsal vagus nerve, right? And that circuit that goes on. And so I think once you start to realize it, and that's when self-awareness is so important. I'm like, hey, I'm in this circuit, in this response to stress, to pain, to, the car that drove in front of me on my bike, like whatever it is, right? Then we can start to work there. So that I named two things. I named the sympathetic nervous system, which is our mobilizing energy, our activation, and that controls, right, our heart rate and, breath rate, right, breathing, and then our dorsal vagus, right, which is part of our parasympathetic, which is our conserve energy, collapse. Another is the ventral vagal, and the ventral vagal is when we feel safe and connected, right? There's 5 cranial nerves in our face, and we're continually looking for, in people, right, like eye contact, hearing, like looking at their face muscles. Is it drawing me in? Is there a safe person, or are they not? And, polyvagal, you'd call that the social engagement system, right? So when we feel that connected, that system is online. We feel safe. We feel connected to another, right? Like when we're in that state, imagine like what we can do when stress comes, right? And I want to also say is like, we are not meant to be in ventral all the time. I think like you hear it and like, oh, that's the goal, like to
just zen and just,
yeah,
it's like the life is not,
right? Like if you're in that state, and
the house is on fire, or like, there's an emergency.
That's a terrible place to be. Like, I don't think you will survive, right? Like, our bodies are meant to not stay in that state, but meant to flow in and gather that mobilizing sympathetic energy or the rest and restore of dorsal, but come back to ventral. But so many times we get stuck, right? And I think that that's where that dysregulated, when you hear that term, I know we hear that a lot now online too. Like that's what that means, where our bodies are confused and we're in a place of safety, but we view it as threat, right? And that's dysregulation.
And do people typically get stuck in one of the maybe the non-zen, the not the ventral, but one more than the other, or is it that they'll just get stuck kind of in between both of those?
Yeah, I think it depends on the person,
Okay.
right? For me, I find that I more go to dorsal
Mhm.
and collapse and shut down. Um, other people might be more sympathetic or, and we could say anxious, right?
Mhm.
I think about that of like being hyper vigilant all the time, like not being able to relax,
Mhm.
being alert, always looking for the next threat, right? Like that's
Right.
sympathetic.
Mhm.
So I think it really depends on the person.
And do you know if there's research or have you seen a correlation between like attachment styles that maybe if you were avoidant, you'd be more the dorsal dweller, and if you were more anxious attached, you might tend to be more sympathetic, or is
Yeah, so this is kind of what I love about polyvagal and attachment theory is that they so are
Mhm.
connected, right? So, like, thinking about it, right? Our autonomic nervous system is continually learning, right? So, if we, from a young age, and I'll say it in this way, like, from our home, we're expected, like, at home to feel safe.
Mhm.
But what happens when home, that place of safety, is not safe and you're harmed? Right? When you think about it from a nervous system lens, we could think about it from attachment, is like almost the body then confuses safety with threat. Rightfully so, because that's what happens. But as you get older, right, and looking at, you could take it with attachment and avoidant or anxious, right? But we look about it from a parasympathetic lens, right? Like now, safe relationships are going to feel dangerous,
Mhm.
or you know, having that calm, that stable job, whatever it is, like is now going to be like, oh wait, I need to be hyper vigilant. I
Mhm.
can't show you my underbelly and be vulnerable because that's when threat happens.
Right.
Right. So I think they are very connected.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. And then what are some of the steps that people can take or some of the exercises or things people can do to move more into that ventral state if they're feeling stuck in some of
Mm-hmm.
the other states?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I love this of befriending the nervous system. I think a lot of times we think, oh, okay, what's the equation? A plus B
Mhm.
equals C that will, bring regulation. And while that's a great question, our nervous system is so beautiful in that it's helped us survive so much and it's helped us learn so much. And it's been with us on this journey throughout our lives.
Mhm.
And so, really learning to befriend it kind of shifts the way you go about living, really. Um, and like thanking it, like, hey, like,
Mhm.
where have you protected me from, right? Like, what have you been holding in my body for so long? And not with this push to change it right away. And I think that that's so important because, and in a lot of my work, it's like, okay, well, just let's change it because I don't want to be anxious
Mhm.
anymore,
Mhm.
or um, whatever it could be. It's like, well, no, like, let's shift the perspective because that anxiety, that hypervigilance protected you.
Mhm.
And there's a reason why you feel that way. So I think that's kind of the first thing I want to say is like befriending the nervous system, really showing respect and honor there, and then being curious about it, right? And that first thing first is to grow and foster your self awareness, right? Like the nervous system doesn't speak in words; it speaks in, temperature, tension in the body. Maybe there's some feelings there, but we kind of got to go in and be like, what am I feeling right now? Oh, there's this tension in this part of my gut, and then kind of sit with it,
Mhm.
not to shift it right away, but what comes up for you as you sit with that tension in your gut. And so that's kind of that work. First is like fostering that self awareness to know, like, oh, I'm in sympathetic right now. Like my heart rate is going, and why?
Mhm.
Oh, because I'm going into this meeting, or I got a call from this family member or whatever it is. And when you begin to have that self awareness to know, then that's when we can begin to kind of do some somatic work with that, which I'll go into.
Yeah, yeah, I'd love to dive into that. I think it's it often brings emotion to me as well, like not only for myself, but to think about so many listeners that I've connected with in just how at war we've been with ourselves for so long. And like you said, it's protective, it's preservation, it's what needed to keep us safe. But I think that, to echo what you said, like being able to unclench our fists and just be able to love ourselves and come at healing from a loving perspective, not a I'm broken and I have to fix this in order to be loved, but like I'm so loved that I can heal. That for me is like the full circle. And I just feel like I've had such a beautiful opportunity to connect with so many people that I know are listening right now, and that this conversation is just so perfectly timed because I feel like there's kind of a collective heaviness that's happening, but also like a really beautiful opportunity for connection. And so I just wanted to pause in that with everyone listening and just remind you that the best place to start healing is from a place of love, not from a place of I'm broken or I have to fix this in order to be able to be loved. And for my personal journey, that's been the ticket. Like that's what's changed everything, is not trying so hard to avoid what's happening internally by distracting, by doom scrolling, by whatever it may be, and instead like create space to just sit and feel and maybe have that little pang or pain even somewhere and just be curious about it. Whereas I think so often it's like, how can I distract in every way, and then what's the 5-minute formula to like heal this, you know? And that
Mm-hmm.
just unfortunately isn't the way that it works. But I think that having conversations like this that give people permission to just exist as they are is often what allows us to then take that next step into healing.
Mhm. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I think that like you touched on, that thought of like, oh, I'm broken.
Mhm.
And I think that's a big part where I take issue kind of with the biomedical model
Mhm.
of therapy sometimes, where it's like, oh, you have generalized anxiety disorder and you have to have this diagnosis. And, when we do that and we label things in regards to that, it makes us think like, oh, there's something wrong.
Mhm.
When this perspective and through this lens is like, no, your body's actually doing what it's meant to do and how it helps you get through.
Yeah.
And so that perspective just shifts so much and brings so much power back to us, which I
Mhm.
think is so important, especially in this time that we're in when we're being bombarded with trauma, with pain, with hate, with hurt, and you just open any news app,
Right.
pain in our families that we're experiencing. And so we're talk about being flooded, our bodies being flooded
Mhm.
with all of this sensory information. And sometimes it is just too much.
Yeah.
And so beginning to be self-aware enough in our bodies to be like, okay, where are we going in protection right now?
Mhm.
And how are we going to go back to ventral too?
Right.
Because, right, we need protection, but we don't want to stay there all the time because there's risks for staying there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would love to kind of learn then how we can move between those, flow between those a little bit as well. And also, when I learned in neuro in grad school, it's like, the cells that fire together wire together and we can
Mm.
strengthen these areas. So, is that what often happens as well, where maybe there was a threat in some sense that was not safe at some point in our life, but then we almost like wire that and make it stronger and stronger and stronger through like all perceived threats. And so that's why we often go directly to that maybe state versus being
Mm-hmm.
able to flow? Or why does that happen where we're kind of in one more frequently?
Yeah, I think of that as like, right, our nervous system's adaptive and it learns from our history. And it adapts to it and it protects us. And so I think that that's really the case, right? And I love how you bring in neurobiology
Mm.
because, yeah, like our bodies are learning from it. And so, right, like I found, like for me, dorsal, like retreating into myself, that protected me in a lot of ways. And so I find that I still like primed for that, even though I've done so much work. And I think that that's the continual healing journey. Um, and I think with that gives more self-compassion for ourselves, right? Of like, okay, and empower, right? When we begin to realize like, oh yeah, I'm in this state. What's something that my body needs right now to feel safe and connected and help me connect with others?
Yeah. And as you said, it's almost like we perceive that state of activation as safety. And like we almost, because it's subconscious, and like even when we bring awareness to it, it's this thing that's happening automatically within us. And so we can be as aware of it as we're wanting to be aware of it. And also, we can't fault ourselves for some of these systems continuing to happen. And so I think that that first piece of just like noticing is so important. And also recognizing that it doesn't have to be like this forever. I think that brings so much hope. It brought me so much hope to hear. And I know there's so many people that just can exhale into knowing that, like, feeling regulated is possible, getting to this space where you're able to, within your own body, move between some of those different aspects is so possible. Like, it doesn't just have to be this either retreating and, going into your turtle shell or being in that like super spun out anxious spiral. It is possible to kind of take control of being able to move into those.
Yes.
So what might that look like for people?
Yeah, and I think with that, right, like when our cues of safety outweigh our cues of danger, right, like that's when new stories emerge. That's when change happens.
Yeah.
And so, and sometimes I'm like, okay, well, I'm also my devil's advocate for myself. Well, it's like, well, how can we be safe in an unsafe world?
Right.
Right. If you're, oh gosh, this world is incredibly unsafe. And especially, if you're a woman of color, if you're a person of color, right? If you're trans, like all these messages, if you're from any non-dominant group in our systemic oppressive system, right? Like there's a threat here. And so I think about this as like a lot of this in some ways are out of our control. But can we make it so you're safe enough, where they're safe enough? And I think about that, like what are anchors and ventral that we can go to, right? So I think of that, like who could that be? Is it a pet? Is it a person? What could it look like? Is it an item you have? I really love like bringing in nature home into my space, into my therapy room. Like I call them little touchstones, like little anchors where I can look at and see, and it's my bridge to ventral in a way. Those moments that make me feel safe, safe enough. Is it like what sort of process could that be that you really enjoy? If it's that really sensory blanket you have, like those little things, like little anchors. Little anchors and ventral. But going back into a little more of the, scientific things, right? For example, if you're in sympathetic, breath is a powerful, powerful tool, right? When we slow our breathing down, that cues our body into being safe. And there's tons of different breath work exercises, but I just like even simplifying it. Like, is your exhale longer than your inhale? And slowing it down. An example of this, I was a few weeks ago out climbing, and I did my first multi-pitch climb. I was very proud of myself. I was really excited. But I was up on my second pitch, and I think, my climbing partner was above me and setting up to belay me up. And I was looking down, and I was like, oh, this is high, right? Like, and I'm not normally afraid of heights, but like, there were some like hawks or turkey vultures, I don't know, like birds of prey up there by my head. And I was like, I noticed my heart rate started going up. Like I was feeling really anxious. It was a new experience. And I was like, oh, okay. I did my deep breathing and slowing it down. And by slowing it down, I was able to get back to ventral, and I was able to then use those higher brain functions to be like, oh, okay, my personal safety's clipped. I'm safe, and I was able to think about it. But when my heart rate started going, I didn't think about all those things.
Right.
I was just like, oh, hi.
Yeah. And often in those moments where those mistakes end up being made, like where you aren't able to be in that regulated space. And when people look back on horrible, tragic things that happen, it's like this moment of acting in that space of not being safe enough to kind of assess.
Yeah. And so like that's just an example, slowing down your breathing. I know people like doing box breathing. That can help. I know some people who box breathing doesn't help because they don't like the restriction holding their breath, and that's okay because everyone's so different, has different stories. So breath is powerful, right? Slowing down our breath, that cues us to feeling safe. If we were from more of the dorsal side, right, we have to mobilize energy up. So like if you think about polyvagal is kind of a hierarchy. So if you're in dorsal, you have to mobilize some energy to get you to sympathetic to get you to ventral. So I like to say this is like walking, right? That has that bilateral movement that helps with the brain too. Rocking, rocking side to side or what feels good, throwing on a song that you like and just letting your body move how it wants to. But just things to kind of bring up some energy up into that space. And I will also say humming. So our vagus nerve, which is, all the way from our brainstem that goes throughout our body, I mentioned, right? Humming actually kind of vibrates that vagal nerve, right? So like, right? Humming like that, really low, can actually help settle us and bring us to regulation. Or, and I know maybe some listeners have heard about this, but VU breathing, which is, right, you're going to inhale all the way down till you exhale and then you stop, right? And you just kind of notice what's happening internally. And then take a breath and do it again. Maybe do it 3 rounds, right? But that vibrates that vagal nerve here to kind of help with that. And so I want to say these things not as like a algorithm or an equation to like, oh, this will bring regulation, right? For some people, that might be weird and it doesn't work, and they're in their head. For others, like putting a hand on their heart and just self-touch can help so much. So everyone's so different, and it's not so much like a one size fits all.
Yeah. I wonder if humming grandmas and grandpas have just like finally figured out the trick and they're just like able to be back and forth. Cause I just think about people that hum so much that I'm like, it may have even started as like unconscious or subconscious self-soothing in some way. And then now like you just think about those people that are happy doing tasks that maybe aren't the happiest tasks and they're just humming while they do it. And I'm like, you've unlocked a secret here.
Yeah. And like think about even infants, right? We rock them, we touch their backs to soothe them, we hum, and it's very similar. Like we are still those primal creatures. And so that's the same thing for us, right?
And then what are some of the other somatic practices, maybe either on their own that listeners can do, or that if they were in a setting where as there was a therapist there that was helping facilitate, like what does some of those look like?
Yeah, I think things that first foremost is like that self-awareness. So going in and being like, okay, what am I noticing? My heart rate's up, or I can't sit still, or whatever it is, and beginning to notice, and then sitting with that, and then even asking yourself, what does my body need right now? Right? If you find yourself more collapsed, like a turtle shell, like my shoulders are going in right now, maybe a movement you could do is rolling them back and almost having your hands out like you're just open to the sky, right? This opposite movement of that, and sitting with that, and like, how does that feel in your body when you're doing it? Right? There's almost this dignity, right? If you have like you're standing up straight and you're sitting in your dignity, and how does that feel in your soma in your body? Right? Like that's something. So just being curious and kind of play with your body about like, hey, like what does it need? Because as someone, I'm like, I'm over here. I don't know you, right? Like I don't know who's listening or what that body needs. And this goes into consent, right? Like your body knows. You just have to listen to it. Right? Maybe it needs to lay flat on the ground, or maybe it needs to hug itself, or it needs to pet your cat or your dog, right? I don't know. But like, what are those things for you, like listeners, right? That can be those touchstones, those anchors to ventral, right? Or maybe it's guided imagery. When was that time that you felt safe? Or is there a place, a meadow or a river, and you can imagine yourself there? Like, how does your body feel when you're there? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? What do you hear? Just kind of going through that, right? And notice, like, does that change anything? Like, has that shifted anything in your body? Are you less activated or more present? I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah. It's so interesting, too, to think about the different parallels we hear with, say, like, you're going to give a presentation and it's like stand in this power stance, or you're going to do these different things. And I think that often it's more of like a subconscious cue to ourselves that we are blank. So like we are powerful and we're going to give this speech, or we are safe and so we can rest. And it's almost Pavlov's dog. You know, it's like we're conditioning ourselves. So if every time we're driving to work, we're conditioning our thoughts and we're bathing ourselves with these neurotransmitters of like, everyone hates me and I'm going to do terrible and it's going to be awful and all of these things, sometimes just disrupting that signal is like the one thing that then can let us have a different outcome. And as delusional as it sounds, like there are times where I always use the example of like, I swear it's on the day that I'm already at the last nerve that I have that I'll leave my house super fast and my purse will get stuck on the handle of my door every time. And what I've started doing to disrupt that is right when it happens, I say, today's going to be the best day ever. And then I usually laugh and I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm attached to my door now and I'm trying to like untangle myself. But it's funny because it's like that same situation as you said from the beginning could have two different outcomes. I could grumble and swear and I could round myself down and I could get in the car and I could say everything sucks and this is terrible. Or I can sort of disrupt that pattern playfully and like with curiosity and just be like, all right, well, I got my one annoying thing out of the day. I can't wait to see what positive things come in next, you know? And at the end of the day, like I still got stuck to the door. It's not as though I changed what actually happened, but I think that so often some of those small disruptions in our patterns are what end up allowing us to kind of like rewire new outcomes and new opportunities. And so in those moments, as you said, just being curious or saying like, this feels ridiculous, but I'm going to like hold myself and I'm just going to rock a little bit here and see if I feel different. I'm going to stand up and like shake all my limbs out before I go into this meeting. Or even if it's virtual, I feel like now with so many people working from home, we don't disrupt that pattern for maybe 8 hours. Like we stay hunched over our desk and like that's our posture. And just to do exactly as you said, like open our chest up and our shoulders up. And one of my good friends, Mariah, practices Reiki and she'll say, when you're in this situation of like disempowerment, just pull your crown back down. Like imagine that you're putting a crown on your head and, as you said, stand in your dignity and just like shift the energy in some way. So I love that.
Yeah. And I think that it's so beautiful. I love that. Pull the crown down. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's ways that I think we can go inward to change outward. You know, I mean, it's like our inner world is often, or our outer world is often our inner world in some way as a reflection. And so what ways in any situation that we're experiencing any type of emotion or experience can we be a little bit curious and playful about like our own energy surrounding that and do small things that can often allow us to be in that more grounded state. Or sometimes it's disrupting it by like doing something ridiculous and we're laughing and it kind of allows our nervous system just to get a different signal versus like sitting in the one space.
You could begin to write a new story, right? Like what happened to us before, what our nervous system helped us survive isn't the rest of the story, right?
Yeah.
And I love this is like we have the power to change that and change how we move going forward. And I love how laughter and humor and play, like, isn't that the sweetest, like, rebellion in a way, right? With all the messages we're being, thrown at and things we're learning is like, okay, how can I shift this mindset, like you were talking about, and bring some curiosity, some play, and find joy? I love that so much.
For any of our listeners that are feeling overwhelmed with a lot of external circumstances, you said, maybe certain things that are like happening politically or just in our world, what are ways that we can remain regulated or like know how to set boundaries with either media or just tools that we can use to navigate kind of a heavy time?
Yeah. Isn't that the question? Let me think about this for myself.
I was going to say, when you have the answer, we will bottle that up and make millions because we're all looking for it.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Such a good question. I think in some ways, right, like our bodies are not meant to be plugged in as much as we are, right? So I mean, for myself, I'm a news junkie. I want to be informed. I've had to really take steps back and be like, okay, I'm going to be on this time and get my news from this source or this radio program, and then I'm going to be done, and I'm going to be present with where I'm at with my community here and now, the people
Yeah.
I work with, my family, Boise, right? And then, like, because if I'm still plugged in to everything that's happening and all the news that's going on, it's like I can't be fully present. And so for me, taking that boundary was really helpful.
Mhm.
And I love that you said boundary because it really is. But maybe that's not for other people. I don't want to speak for anyone else. I also know being informed, right? Like there's some semblance of control there, right?
Yeah.
Where we feel a little safer. If we can see what's coming, then we're safe.
Mhm.
And I believe that too. But I also think maybe there's a way where we can kind of balance time to be present.
Right.
I think doom scrolling is a pit we can fall into, and it's very, very hard to be out of.
Right.
But I also think taking those moments, like for me, being outside is a
Mhm.
huge thing. It lowers my cortisol, which is my stress hormones. I love walking, hiking. I mean, it's really hot right now, so I don't know so
Right.
much about hiking. But swimming, just being near water for me, that's so regulatory, where I can just sit by the river and just breathe
Mhm.
for a little moment, right? And I think about too, like, what am I doing in the community that um, I have power over? And that helps me as well. And I think advocacy is a huge part of that and change making. And so, whatever that looks like, but
Yeah.
that's just for me. And I don't want to speak too much for everyone else.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. And I think that there's another aspect of kind of permission that often has to be granted where to give yourself permission to rest from the input, to rest even at times from the advocacy or like having to always be trying to do something is the only way we recharge and then can be fully present and also show up in these circles and communities and places where we really can make change. And I think that so often it feels like when everything feels out of control and I couldn't even write on one sheet of paper all the things that I feel need attention and love and advocacy and change and all of those things, it can be so overwhelming that often what happens is paralysis in not even knowing what to do. And so I think that for me, I really do similar. Like I really try to disconnect and not just absorb and take in so much information that yes, is privileged to be able to say, like, I'm going to choose not to listen to this right now or to absorb this right now. And also, everyone in any space has to give themselves those breaks sometimes to just recharge and to be able to then bring our best selves forward. And so I've found at times like this overwhelm of like, I'm never doing enough. Like, I need to keep serving and showing up and doing more and more and more. But if I'm doing that as a shell of myself that doesn't have really anything tangible to give, is that even making a difference? Or is that almost like performative at that point? Because I just
Mm-hmm.
feel like, well, I showed up to all the things. And so for me, part of the both consent and permission has been knowing when it is imperative that I unplug and take that break. And so all of your examples of being in nature and like being without your phone, being without the news source in that moment to just let your body feel safe, even in knowing there's still uncertainties and knowing that we're never going to be able to anticipate every single thing that's coming. Like anyone that's lost someone unexpectedly or had some type of a tragedy that happened unexpectedly, you can't prepare for that. And so I think just giving yourself any chance you can to recharge is so necessary right now.
And I think that that's where kind of that holistic wellness and that embodiment comes into play, where it's like you have to take care of yourself, right? Because, right, if you don't, I think sometimes we think, oh, we're too busy to do these things. We're too busy to take 5 minutes to touch in with ourselves and touch base and what's happening inwardly. Because we have so many things. We have drop up, we have drop off, we have pickup, we have school and this meeting and that, and it's so much. But the risks, if we don't and we stay in these protective states, are very catastrophic for our bodies. Um, I mean, it helped us for so long, and then there's a point when it becomes maladaptive, right? And so we need to go back to that fluidity, and that requires rest. That requires having that time. So
Yeah, definitely. Well, as we close our conversations, I always like to ask guests what their personal version of red nail energy is. So I would love to hear yours.
I've been thinking about this, And honestly, I think mine's more of like a mantra
Mm-hmm.
for me. Like, I'm okay as I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I take that into spaces when I need confidence. And, right, like the part of me that maybe is like insecure, or the part of me that is confident. I don't know, just
Yeah.
taking that as like, I'm okay as I am. And I take that as I walk into a space, or I walk into the room that I work with, or people I work with, or with motherhood, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm okay as I am.
I
And
love that.
that
Yeah.
offers me a lot of freedom with that.
Yeah. That's such a great sentiment to end on. And when comparison comes in, or we're invited to, again, list all the things that we feel like we must change, to just be able to like breathe into that space of being
Mhm.
okay as we are, and knowing that we all have these grand lessons that we were put on this earth to learn, and that the best thing that we can do is just be present in learning them, and give
Mhm.
ourselves grace and forgiveness along the way, and know that anything we're facing, we are okay just as we are.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love that.
That's good.
Any last words or intuitive thoughts you would like to leave listeners with?
Yeah. If you're curious more about polyvagal, right? Deb Dana's wrote some great books, and she even has these awesome little flashcards of with different, you know, regulation little things, if it's breathing or if it's this movement, which can be helpful. I think this can be really helpful with parenting when you start to kind of look at kids. So, you know, and your kids and how you parent. Yeah, so if you're curious, look more at that, or you want to go more, like finding a trauma informed therapist, and one that maybe specializes in somatic or, you know, neurosystem work, would be great. So,
Amazing. And I will link all of that in the show notes, as well as how you can connect with Abigail if you'd like to reach out to her directly. And as always, listeners, you are so loved and seen. You are okay exactly as you are. And we will catch you on the next episode.
bye.
Bye.